Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Sarah tōku ingoa. Hi, I'm Sarah from the Quality Assurance team, and today I'm going to be running through the pre-moderation webinar with you. We're going to explore some of the things that we, the Quality Assurance team, need to consider when making sure that an assessment is fit for purpose. In order to do that, we have created a mock unit standard and written an assessment against it. We'll address each of these documents and identify the criteria that you need to be aware of if you're preparing your own assessment material or if you just want to make sure that the one you're using is up to date. So let's start with the unit standard itself. This is the one that we've made up. Many of you are already familiar with unit standards, but have you taken notice of the information they contain and what parts are necessary in the assessment? In addition to the title, we also see the level and the credit value, and this will influence the complexity of the assessment. So the lower the level, the more simple we would expect the assessment to be. If you wish to investigate that further, there is a level descriptor on the NZQA website, and that'll give you some further guidance. The version number is in the top right-hand corner of the unit standard, and it identifies the currency of that said unit standard. And I'll come to that shortly as we move through this document. The purpose is the overarching theme that applies to the entire unit standard. This summarises what the student will be able to do on completion of the assessment and may have reference to the type of student that would likely to be completing it. Our role in pre-moderation is to make sure that the assessment can be completed in the appropriate environment in order to meet its purpose. In our example, this assessment can be delivered in a school or a workplace. Lastly, in this table is the prerequisite. This must be achieved before they can attempt the current assessment, and we would expect to see this mentioned in the learner instructions. The guidance information needs to be included or considered in the assessment. In our example, we have legislation, conditions of assessment, and a list of definitions. During pre-moderation, we look to see how this has been included within the assessment or shared with the learner. The second part of the unit standard is about the required evidence. So, what does the learner have to be able to do? Imagine that each unit standard is made up of a series of building blocks, and the biggest block is called the outcome. Our example has one outcome. Bigger unit standards worthy of more credits may have 3, 4, or 5 outcomes. It provides an overview of the type of evidence that's required. How that evidence is gained is outlined in the smaller building blocks called performance criteria or PCs. The PC outlines what must be evidenced in order to meet the outcome. Our goal is to make sure that these PCs have been met, and we'll look into this a bit further when we compare an actual assessment to this particular unit standard. The last thing on this page I want you to notice is the last date of assessment. Remember I mentioned version numbers earlier? This table tells you if your assessment is the most current version, and more importantly, is it still valid? You can see each version has an expiry date, and if you submitted an assessment for an expired version, it would not meet requirements and, of course, would not be approved. However, more importantly, if you happen to be using an assessment that is an expired version, the assessment would be invalid and you wouldn't be able to register the unit with NZQA. Imagine how you'd feel if you had to tell your student that they didn't get those last 4 credits. So if you're not sure, go to the NZQA website to make sure you're using the latest version. So now we've looked at the unit standard, let's have a look at the assessment. This is the front page. I just want to let you know that this is not a template, but we've used this format to highlight the information that must be presented. Firstly, there are the details from the unit standard, being the title, the version, the credit value, and the level. Looking at the table, the parts that are essential are the student details such as their name, signature and date, a place for comments or feedback from the assessor, and the overall outcome that is signed and dated by them, the assessor. It is considered best practice to record the assessment attempts, and as you can see, we have provided for that in the middle part of the table. However, this doesn't necessarily have to be on the front page and is often found at the back of the assessment. We also look, as we move into the actual assessment itself, that the learner has been given sufficient clear instructions as to what they have to do for this assessment. This is where we'd expect to find reference to the prerequisite, the definitions from the guidance information, and any additional evidence that is required from the learner. You can see it clearly tells them that there are 2 tasks to this assessment. It tells them what they are and that they must provide photographic evidence. Okay, so we know there are 2 parts. So let's first have a look at the theory assessment. Now, just to explain what you're looking at, we have included an extract from the unit standard below the table, and that's just for your reference today. This would not be in the actual assessment. We can see that this table in question relates to PC 1.3. Potential problems with coffee and coffee making equipment are identified. There are several ways that this question could have been presented and that would still meet the criteria. In this example, we've used 3 questions that will enable the learner to demonstrate what they know about potential problems. It's not the role of quality assurance to comment on your style of question, but rather to make sure that it allows the learner to meet the evidence that's required in the PC and that it's appropriate to the level and easily understood. Another consideration is how much evidence is needed. When reviewing the material, we look to see how the learner and the assessor knows how much evidence is necessary. This is really important when it comes to considering fairness and consistency. In our example, you can see we've used numbers or quantity. So 1 cause of weak coffee, 2 reasons why it's not hot enough. Our assessment is a practical verification. Again, this should include clear instructions to ensure that the learner knows exactly what is required. We can see they need to be observed on 2 different occasions, but for the purpose of today, we just have 1 verification checklist. And again, because this is not a template, it can be presented in different formats. The left-hand column represents the PCs, followed by a second column containing range items. So what's a range item? These are even smaller building blocks of suggested or required evidence. What we look at here is to see how and where each of these range items have been written into the assessment. So we see range items for 1.1 say may include coffee, milk and accompaniments. So that means that those items are suggested when checking for freshness of ingredients, but could be substituted with other relevant products. However, in 1.2, the range says must include coffee and hot water. So therefore, they must be in the table. Both ranges also include not limited to, which means it's acceptable to have other items in the assessment and that the assessment will still meet the PC requirements. In the instructions, photographic evidence was required, and we can see that this is recorded here. This type of evidence ensures consistency across learners within your training institute. And finally, we've asked for the job title of the verifier. This clarifies the authority of the person doing the verification and is particularly valid during work experience where the verifier would usually be a supervisor or manager, and when a colleague is just not appropriate. The assessor and the verifier may, however, be the same person, and this is quite common in a classroom situation. The answers to this assessment. For every assessment, there needs to be guidance to the assessor to ensure consistent decisions. The more robust the assessor guide, the more straightforward it is for assessors, and the more fair it is for students. This may come in the form of a completed assessment, as we've provided here. However, there are several other ways it can be provided. You can see that there are a few answer options, but it's the judgment statement that gives the overarching guidance. In our example, we've said that the answer may vary, but with that, we trust in the assessor that it will still be relevant. Assessments, however, there may be very specific answers and no variance would be acceptable. As you can see, there is no variance on the quantity required in the example. In pre-moderation, we are looking to make sure that the guidance, the question, the answers, and the judgment statement all align with each other. Now, the verification form, because there is no actual answer to a verification, the judgment statement identifies what the verifier needs to be looking for and what the learner will demonstrate. Good, strong verification comments are important because they confirm the student has demonstrated the skills necessary to meet the unit standard. An assessment that does not contain sufficient guidance is unlikely to be approved in pre-moderation. So that brings us to the end of our overview, and I hope it gives you a better understanding of the pre-moderation process and some of the principles that are applied. We've used a paper-based assessment for ease of this presentation, but we do also recognise that assessing is an ever-changing platform, and we look forward to embracing new modalities as they arise while still applying the best practice principles. Please don't hesitate to contact us at the moderation email on your screen if you have any further questions. Kia ora.